Hey, everybody, welcome back to the B2B Content Show, a podcast about the how, what, and why of B2B content marketing. The show is brought to you by Conversa, a podcasting agency that helps B2B brands start podcasts to connect with prospects and generate content and grow brand awareness. I'm Jeremy Shear, and my guest today is Matthew Kaplan. Matthew is Senior Content Marketing Manager at Moloco, a machine learning platform that helps businesses unlock their unique first-party data. Matthew, thanks so much for making time to be on the show.
Thanks, Jeremy, for having me on. Looking forward to our conversation.
So we're going to talk today about interactive content experiences. Before we dive into that, can you just say a little bit about Moloco and what unique first-party data is?
Yeah, so Moloco is really a machine learning company that's using really unique technology to solve some of the biggest problems that are facing digital advertising today, whether that's in helping companies launch retail media platforms, helping mobile apps find users. We firmly believe that technology, and especially machine learning and deep neural networks, are needed to help these businesses see success in an ever evolving ad tech landscape.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I just wanted to make sure our listeners kind of understood what you guys do and where you're coming from. So, interactive content experiences. Let's just start with what that means, at least from your point of view. What is an interactive content experience?
Yeah, I think so much of B2B content especially has been very static and one-sided. So anything from a typical blog post, an ebook that's hosted as a PDF, it's typically there's something that's uploaded onto the screen and then you're supposed to kind of consume it. And it's a very sort of one-sided affair. You as a content marketer, you're creating this content, and certainly you'll have some analytics that help you determine how it's being engaged with, but it's a very static experience. Even a video, I think, is great content, and I'm a big fan of video content, but it's still a very sort of one-sided experience. You hit play and then you sit there as an end user, as a consumer of that content. What I see as interactive content is more, we have so much great functionality within the digital ecosystem that we all function in, right? Like, we're not publishing a newspaper or a magazine more often than not. And there's so much of that functionality that we don't really bring to bear in our content. And I think this is a huge missed opportunity because it gives you as a content marketer the opportunity to develop pieces that are going to really engage your audience, and you're able to allow them to have some control over how they're consuming the experience. You're giving them the opportunity to really engage, and not in a very active sense, and not just in a passive reading or viewing sense. So really what I see as interactive content is anything in which you as the consumer of that content need to be involved in moving the story along. Even if it's something as simple as thumbing through a slideshow, um, as opposed to, say, scrolling, all the way up to more like video game like experiences. That's really what I am talking about when I talk about interactive content.
Okay, and as I take it, the kind of the argument for interactive content is that it's more engaging than the kind of more static content that you were describing. Is that where the value lies?
I think so. I think a lot of it is there's a lot of static content out there, and I am very guilty of producing a lot of static content. I have written many blog posts, white papers, infographics, etc. in my time. And there's a lot less interactive content that's produced. Now, there's many reasons behind this, of course, but it really is an opportunity to stand out from what probably your competition is doing, and to really ensure that your user is actively reading. Especially on the blog side, a lot of blog posts that are written can be hugely impactful, but often that kind of content is skimmed, not read. With interactive content, you can be much more confident that the content you're producing is actually being sort of fully engaged with, and that it's whoever you're looking to target is really able to take in your messaging, because they have to self-select through the entire experience.
Okay, so in order to consume the content, the user has to kind of be inside it and, as you said, self-select, making choices about where to go within the content. Okay.
Exactly.
So give me an example of what that looks like. I think you mentioned maybe a slideshow that you thumb through, but let's get more in depth on that. Like what would be a kind of ideal example of this kind of interactive content?
Yeah. So I will give some shout outs to, I think, kind of two different companies that I think produce really fantastic interactive content. So one is a company called Growth Design. It's a small sort of design consultancy business based in Montreal, and they do a lot of it. It's a very simple format. It's really much just like you thumb through using the arrows to get through the content, but I think it uses visuals and links in a way to really tell the story in a way that's much more interactive and much more visually interesting than what you would see if that same content, same high quality written content, same high quality analysis was just in, say, a blog post or a PDF. And they do some, I think, some really fantastic work. Another company I think has done some really great work is MailChimp. So MailChimp has actually invested in developing sort of mini video games, if you will, and kind of
Mm,
like the classic sort of scrolling type video games. For those that remember some of the early video games of the 80s or 90s, it's kind of taking that format and being very playful. Obviously, that's very on brand for a company like
hmm.
MailChimp, but they've had a chance to produce a number of these, and I think does a really great job of that.
Okay, so I haven't seen those actually. I'm curious to check them out. Can you say a little bit more about these games? So a game is obviously interactive, right? Insofar as you're like playing it. Um, how are the games? But I'm assuming they're not just for fun. Like they have marketing value for Mailchimp as well. So like, how does that part work?
Yeah. So typically, if I remember correctly from the MailChimp example, it is a very fun experience, which I
Hmm.
think is okay. And I think is something that probably a lot of B2B content does need more of, right? Like we're
Mm,
still talking to people. If you can add that element of joy and surprise to your content, I think that's of huge value, even in the driest of B2B subjects.
hmm.
So I'll give an example. So one of them is it's supposed to be like the main character is delivering newspapers, and I think part of what they're hoping to gain is this idea that we've kind of evolved beyond having to throw newspapers and physically distribute physical papers to get your message across. Instead, you can use MailChimp to send emails,
Hmm.
which is preferable. So that's part of it. Typically, I've seen instances where you have to enter your email address either before or after or during the content consumption process. And so that's often where it sort of fits in is not only are they generating awareness for the content, but then they're capturing a soft lead and email address that they can
Hmm.
then follow up with later. And I think even including it sort of later on is a great idea for it, right? Because you can use the content itself to hook the reader to generate interest, and then once they have a chance to see your perspective, then you can say, hey, like we can provide these kind of services for you. Let's be in touch. That kind of call to action makes a lot of sense to me.
Hmm. Okay. So something like, coding a game, even a simple game, is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. At least for somebody like me, like if you would need resources to do that. Um, and this sound like even though this kind of content I think is probably sort of in its infancy, right, and there we'll see more and more of it. Um, but like for can you think of examples for a content team that's like, okay, yeah, we want to do interactive content, but we have, limited budgets, limited time. Are there ways that you can do this kind of simply, with the resources that you have to make things more interactive?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I am a content team of one, and while we do have a great content marketing agency that we work with, it's not like I have all of the resources and all the time in the world to spend, building out a video game that someone can play on a PS5, for
Yeah.
example, right? So I think that is a really good point. a great place to start, I would say, is probably going to be quizzes.
Mm.
If you every I think every major social media platform has a built-in quiz template. Google Forms is great in a pinch. If you need something quick and easy, and quizzes perform really well. We
Hmm.
at Moloco did a quiz earlier this year on IDFA, and so Apple has some privacy changes that have impacted our industry that rolled out in 2021, and we did a quiz saying, hey, if test your knowledge, like what do you really know about these changes, and if you tweet out and or post on LinkedIn your results, you get entered for a raffle to win a prize package of a Moloco backpack and a few other things. And the combination of the quiz plus the contest, it performed really well for us.
Mm.
And the quiz is something that's pretty simple, I think, to roll out. There's a lot of basic functionality out there
Yeah.
that you can implement. The other one I would say is I think the slideshow format is in a way almost underutilized.
Mm.
I'll think a good example. In some ways, I think Instagram really reinvigorated the slideshow, because what was maybe a very staid way to state your case in a business meeting has now become a content format that I think most consumers are really used to. They're used to this kind of having to scroll through on the screen to learn about a topic, or just to check out memes, for example. And even that simple kind of scrolling motion that you have, where you have to use your finger to go to the next slide, it's very, very simple interactivity, but it's a very easy way to ensure that you're getting your content seen, and just to add a little bit of interactivity and to help your content stand out a little bit.
Hmm. Okay. So that those are really useful examples, I think, that there are that you don't have to have unlimited resources to create content that draws the user in through that kind of participation. Um, it makes me think of I'm probably older than you, so I don't know if you remember these, but when I was a kid, there were these choose your own adventure books. And that was a very simple kind of interactive content. You'd read and then it would give you a choice. What should the character do? If you're going to do this, go to this page and so on. And sometimes you'd go and the character would die, and you'd have to go back and make the other choice. But that sticks in my mind. I mean, I still remember that. And it was very simple. It was just kind of making a choice and then seeing what happened. It's sort of the simplest form of interactivity that I think you could probably. I wonder if there's a place for that sort of stuff in digital content.
Yeah, absolutely. I love those series as well. For a long time, I've been really pushing to create an ebook along a similar format, and
Mm.
one will be released in 2023. So, in a way,
Oh, that's
you've
cool.
read my mind a little bit. So keep an eye out on Moloco.com for that.
Oh, cool! Like a choose your own adventure ebook.
Exactly.
Choose your own business adventure.
Yeah, and I think even I'll give a so this is very much a credit to my former colleague Soraya Wright, but she had the idea of you could take that format and you could then extend it one step further into a video game. I'll give a good if you take kind of the N64 was the big video game system when I was a kid, and if you
Hmm.
take a like Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, where it's this character kind of moving around in a 3D space, and obviously that plot is a little bit more exciting and enriching than probably anything I would ever write about in a B2B context. But I think if you had the time and the resources, I think it would be really cool to build out an idea like that, where it's kind of this virtual target audience member. They have to go to an office, or kind of explore a world, and they can, instead of kind of explaining your points of view in an ebook, they'd have to like talk to different characters, and different speech
Hmm.
bubbles would come up. Um, Again, this is probably a very expensive and time consuming project, but I think something like that would be really cool. And you know, I think of the example of what Chipotle has done in Roblox, of that they built out a little store, and then it's a maze. And I think as some of those platforms mature, I think there's opportunities to even use like a Roblox to build out an experience in
Hmm.
B2B. I don't know if the audience is there yet, And maybe for some brands it is. I think for most in the B2B space, probably not. But
Hmm.
I would expect to see many more of those kind of experiences in the future for sure.
Yeah, right. And it's sort of hard to predict exactly where this is going to go, but it's fun to just kind of imagine, like a VR, fully immersive VR experience where, you put on the glasses or the helmet or whatever it's going to be, and you're just like in a world and it's designed to educate you about whatever, but it's totally up to you where to go and what to look at. I mean, that could be pretty cool.
Yeah, and I remember going to a conference a few years ago, and they had that for a server where
Mm,
you could, they had a virtual server, like a virtual server room, and you put on the Oculus headset, and you get to, like see how it's set up, and you kind of learn about the cooling systems and the spacing and the wiring that's in place. And certainly, I think if Mark Zuckerberg has his way, we'll probably be in this world in a B2B space before we know it.
yeah, well, he's betting the future of his company on that, right? And there, in the world of real estate, there's probably this probably already exists, right? I'm just kind of out of the loop on that, but there's probably VR experiences if like you're shopping for a home or office space or whatever to be able to kind of be inside it virtually and take a look around rather than just looking at photos.
Yeah, I think it'll probably be a matter of time before a webinar is going to exist in
Yeah,
the metaverse through VR, where it's avatars that are explaining a topic as opposed to just video. So
yeah,
yeah, that and AR I think has a lot of really interesting applications. You know, it's really, I like how Amazon does it, where instead of shopping, you could kind of see like, well, how big is this pot going to be on my stovetop?
yeah,
Maybe there's ways in which you could kind of bring that sort of physical experience if you're selling. Yeah, I'll go back to servers again.
yeah.
You could use an AR experience to see like what it actually looks like in your data center. And I'm sure there's many more examples and opportunities there.
Yeah, it'll be really cool to see how this transpires, and let's make it at 10 years from now. We'll uh we'll get back on the podcast. I'm sure the podcast will still exist 10 years from now.
You
Or at
heard it
least
here first. Yes.
yeah. And we'll see where things stand. Well, Matthew, how can people connect with you?
Yeah, I would say the best way is to reach me on LinkedIn. I'll be sure to include my link there. So yeah, reach out to me, connect, and love to chat.
Okay, great. We're going to put a link to your LinkedIn in our show notes. So, folks, you can find it there. Matthew, thank you so much. A lot of really interesting thoughts, a lot to chew on. Thanks a lot for your time.
Yeah, Jeremy, thanks so much for having me on the show. It was great.